I speak to you in the name of the one holy and living God.
Amen.
Happy New Year! This is the first Sunday of Advent, the beginning of our new liturgical year. And this year, the Gospel according to Luke will be our principal gospel text. And every year at Apostles, we have a theme that kind of informs us. Last year, the theme was becoming fully human, so now we are all fully human, right? And this year, I invite you to join me, putting our heads in our hearts. Putting our heads in our hearts. So let me explain why I think this is a worthy endeavor. Putting our heads in our hearts, we rise above dualistic conflicts, mind or body, matter or spirit, science or religion, humanity or divinity. We rise above these conflicts by holding these seeming opposites together. And this matters because as long as we assume that there are only two mutually exclusive possibilities for engaging people and the world, which either, the possibility is right or wrong, good or evil, we will not experience God with us. Let that sink in. Even though we might have little glimpses of God with us, as long as we are locked into dualistic thinking, we will not experience the fullness of our with God life. But there is good news. The antidote to dualistic thinking is putting our heads in our hearts, which enables us to stop demanding simple answers. Am I right or am I wrong? Is she good or is she bad? Is he crazy or is he sane? Non-dualistic thinking does not force us into a box by demanding simple answers. Non-dualistic consciousness or thinking tolerates ambiguity. In fact, it welcomes mystery, which, by the way, is how we experience our with God life, in mystery. Now, there's every chance I'm going to offend all of you. I know I have already multiple times, but I'm going to tell you a little snippet of a true story that can be offensive, but it makes this point. While attending a meeting early last week, one of the people present was a man whom I will call Harold. And Harold described to us a situation with his good friend Maud that was very disturbing to him. So you see, when Harold mentioned a good thing that former President Trump had accomplished, he noticed that his previously peaceful friend Maud, her countenance just transformed. She became agitated, her face became red, and she yelled at him and said, "The man is evil." Needless to say, this provoked a painful rift between them. And here is what I think is going on. Harold and Maud are operating from entirely different levels of consciousness. No one's bad, no one's broken, no one's wrong. Maud, you see, insists that people or reality fit into one of two mutually exclusive categories. This is dualistic thinking or consciousness. Things are right or wrong, good or evil. There's little, if any, gray zone. But, you see, Harold is operating from a non-dualistic perspective that tolerates ambiguity. For him, life appears in a myriad shades of gray. Sometimes pretty good, sometimes not so good. And I believe much of the conflict that we're experiencing in our families, our country, and the world is a consequence of people operating from different levels of consciousness, much as Harold and Maude. And it turns out that our gospel text has much to say about that today. It rather reads like a graphic novel about non-dualistic consciousness. You see, Jesus insists that when we are fainting from fear and foreboding of what is coming upon the world, we're to stand up and raise our heads because our redemption is drawing near. What? In our context, news of COVID variants circling the globe, holiday horrors during parades, essential supplies and Christmas gifts afloat in a traffic jam of cargo ships, sexual violence, misinformation, banning of books, backsliding of democracy, not to mention rising temperatures and tides. All this tells us grace is near? Really, Jesus? How do we hold this paradox together? And this is Jesus' counsel to us. Despite rampant troubles in our families, country, and the world, Jesus is concerned with the condition of our hearts, not with the things around us. He says, be on guard, protect your hearts. He doesn't say, protect your 401k or your personal property. Protect your heart. Regardless of the whims and the wiles of the world, our hearts must remain open and alert. Open and alert. This is Jesus' counsel, no matter what's going on around us. How are we to do this? Have you ever wondered how Jesus seems to know exactly what to say to resist temptation, to diffuse attacking attorneys, to humble an arrogant seeker, to forgive a sinner, preach great sermons, tell amazing wisdom tales, and never complain? With not an ounce of arrogance, Jesus explains, all things have been handed to me by the Father. All that I say and all that I do is given to me in relationship with the divine presence, God with me. Every morning and every evening when Jesus steps away from the disciples to pray, I believe he is putting his head in his heart by aligning his will in the will of God. Observing Jesus, we witness this evolution of consciousness from dualistic to non-dualistic. And this is how wisdom is born. Because wisdom is a child of the intimate relationship between humble humanity, as exemplified by Jesus, and benevolent divinity, what Jesus calls the Father. Wisdom is born when our heads are seated in our hearts. When we're absorbed in dualistic thinking, it's really as if we're wearing blinders, and we cannot see the full spectrum of possibilities. We're locked into what I would consider like a two-chambered box. And there's a wall between the two chambers with a really narrow doorway, and we're forced to stand on one side or the other. And when we're forced to make a choice like that, naturally it feels like we're stuck or stifled. No wonder Jesus says, don't let your hearts be weighed down. When we're forced to make choices like that, we become anxious, angry, or afraid. But Jesus shows us a way of living beyond this two-chambered box by never straying from relationship with God, Jesus puts his head in his heart, which is to say, he chooses to align his will with something greater than himself. The world is not black and white, this or that. And as a result, wisdom, which is the child of non-dualistic consciousness, wisdom is born. Now, knowing with our heads is necessary and good. It takes care of business. It enables us to bring reason and language and context to our hearts. But knowing with our heads alone does not engender wisdom. By putting our heads in our hearts, we experience subtleties, nuances, 10,000 shades of gray and mystery that is not available to our heads alone. And this frees us from the prison of that two-chambered box. We're no longer to make choices between this or that, good or evil, human or divine. We begin to see all things are possible because nothing is impossible from the non-dualistic with God perspective. Dear people of God, the way, the truth, and the life revealed to us in Jesus insists that we rise above our dualistic thinking minds that are always in conflict with ourselves and others, that we mature into non-dualistic consciousness by putting our heads in our hearts and allowing wisdom to be born through us, so that, like Jesus, we will be free to resist temptation, diffuse attack, be kind, forgiving, humble, speak wise words. And I love this one: never complain. Amen.